to discuss today is, oh, great, thank you, Sarah, is to discuss really what those priorities and what those actions are going to be for the next 2 years. And so let me, the timeline, you'll see, sorry, my screen is over here showing the slides, which is why I'm looking that way. But we're in the January through March 2022 section, which is sort of right here, if you can see my cursor, where we're having public meetings to solicit ideas on topics to be pursued within each priority area. And then there's a few drafting and clearance processes, and the plan will be, you can expect it to be released in September. And so I think that is the general background I wanted to give. I do want to take a brief pause here before I hand it over to Alan to talk a little bit more about the data specific, more specifically what we'll be dealing with in this meeting, to just ask if there's any questions about the plan or the implementation plan or sort of the process generally. You can go ahead and unmute yourself if there are, or raise your hand. Okay, well, feel free to ask them if they come up later. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alan to take it away for the rest of the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Well, not the whole rest of the meeting, hopefully, just a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. And there we go. So as Hazel mentioned, we've got these 4 priority areas that are focusing on community resilience and health, Arctic systems interactions, sustainable economies and livelihoods, and risk management and hazard mitigation. And kind of crossing across all of those, we've got each of the, there we go, the foundational activities. And so the idea is that all of the foundational activities are supposed to interact with all of the priority areas, at least to some extent. And so we've got technology application, innovation, participatory research and Indigenous leadership and research, monitoring, observing, modeling, and prediction, education, training, and capacity building, and last but not least, put it at the top of the slide, data management. And so the foundational activities interact with each other as well as all other parts of the plan. I don't think I need to convince anyone on this call that data management is crosses all sorts of different boundaries, which is why it's definitely listed as a foundational activity as opposed to a priority area in this plan. So what we have been doing so far is some brainstorming, some planning, some thinking around ideas of what we want to get done within this data management foundational activity, especially in the next 2 years. And so we're going to lay out some of that thinking for you to hopefully seed some discussion and conversation. Something I want to emphasize is that right now we are, hopefully you're still seeing my PowerPoint, that right now we are asking people to contribute your ideas, your considerations. You can contribute individually. You can speak for a larger agency or institution if you want to, but you don't have to, and we don't necessarily expect that. What we're doing here, we intentionally call it a listening session. There can be some discussion as well, but as far as how this process works, we're not deciding anything here, right? We're hoping to gather inputs, feedback, and hear discussion, but not come to any sorts of conclusions. Because as Hazel laid out, there is a longer process and we want to make sure to respect that process. So we will hopefully hear from lots of you and we will make time to go around individually if we have time and if we need to. So some of the topics that we have put forward so far, our primary objective that we think we've identified, but want to talk about that, is focusing around open data, fair and care data management principles. So exploring what implementation of open data in the Arctic looks like, and looking at perspectives on care and fair data management principles for the Arctic in particular. That's the objective. Some of the deliverables might look like hosting discussions which explore where care and fair are mutually reinforcing, as well as where there might be some trade-offs and tensions. And then through these activities, working towards creating summaries of considerations for data users and publishers, providers, managers around fair and care implementation, as well as some guidelines for data licensing potentially. So you can see there's a lot wrapped up in there. So hopefully some good points for discussion in terms of reactions to it, stepping stones of how to get there. That's what's achievable in 2 years, that sort of thing. In terms of other special topics, we'll work with the different priority areas and foundational activities to also focus in on some individual or some, more applied or specific topics. And that could be areas like broader discussions around open licensing that aren't focusing on care and fair. Data licensing, as I mentioned, data for Department of Homeland Security, coastal/erosion risk in the US Arctic, local community perspectives on crowdsourced bathymetry, and more. We want to see where conversations are going. We're continuing to have conversations with other topical areas within the planning groups, and we want to hear from this group as well. So I'll just end with this last slide that we can leave up if it's helpful for a conversation to serve as a departure point for conversation. I'll turn it over to, I think, Jonathan I'm one of the other team leads who might facilitate the conversation from here going forwards.
Yeah, I can help. We can tag team this.
And I see that Mike is on board too, who's the other
Mike, right.
team lead.
So our job really is to listen. So looking at the things you see here, is there a particular thing that comes to mind or interest that you have? Is something we could try to emphasize, or did we get something wrong? We open it up for your input.
Oh, this is Bill Manley. I just put it in the chat. It's intriguing to see this listed, creating summaries of considerations. Will those be use cases? And I think that would help guide not only the longer term plan, but the shorter term implementation plans.
So this is Mike, data team co-lead. So use cases of maybe best practices for data management. And I think that's one way I think we're thinking about it. But interestingly, like in terms of process, so to inform the implementation plan, we kind of already have to have those best practices ready. And I think what we're thinking as of now is making that one of the activities we do is to invite speakers to raise visibility of what's potentially considered data management best practices, good examples of alignment with care and fair principles, and using that as a way maybe to identify use cases that could maybe help us refine and shape our objectives to be more beneficial to the community. But I think the key there is we're drafting considerations, and that's intentional. It's tricky with what we can IARPIC do, especially the data management team, in terms of creating information that can be acted on. I don't think there's too much pushback or challenges with saying, here's some things that we found doing having these interesting conversations, and do with it as you wish. Consider them in your data management.
Very good.
Matt, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thanks. So I think that the plan that is here is a really excellent high-level overview of the sort of the general areas which all data management within US and internationally occurs. And these principles like fair and care are super high level. It's kind of hard to disagree with the approach in general, because it's such a general one. We should collect data, make it findable and accessible and open, and we should do that ethically and responsibly. Okay, good. Then I guess my question is, like, what's the more specific thing that we really will do to advance those things? And one of the things I think is exciting about IARPIC is that the word interagency is right in the title. And a lot of the efforts at data management within agencies are very much dedicated to both, say, agency specific and or even sometimes program specific infrastructure that doesn't really talk to each other very much. And so, you know, something like the F in FAIR for findable seems like a really great place to start. Like, you know, there isn't a lot of participation of federal agencies in things like the schema.org efforts and cross-agency discovery. They're more focused on within agency information systems. And I was wondering if maybe IARPC could have as one of its major goals to encourage multiple agency systems, whether you're talking about NCI or NSF data systems or, you know, DOE data systems, to be really deeply engaging with the federated data discovery approaches that are emerging in the community. I think it would be a really valuable thing if there was resources invested in that at every agency.
Thanks so much, Matt. Terrific point. And I think so. One thing we've been talking about is, you know, getting the interagency together to just talk, like identify different perspectives. What are the interpretations of each of these, the components of these principles? And of course, you know, there are areas where they're mutually reinforcing, areas where there's tension, and clearly those need to be worked out as you're designing and implementing your data management. So one thing we talked about is just getting various agencies to explore what their agencies are thinking about when they look at FAIR principles. How does that apply to them? And I think through that process, hopefully, develop some kind of collective perspective across agencies, sort of interoperability of how we interpret these to begin. I think it's a first step to begin that conversation. Okay, how do we improve and in some cases streamline across agencies where we have to have the definitions at least in common before we can make real improvements, real tangible improvements. So that was one reaction to those terrific comments. Jonathan, Alan, others? Or anyone else in the group?
While you're thinking about that, I have a little follow-up too, which is to say that, you know, there are some international efforts in this area that are ongoing. So for example, the Arctic Data Committee has organized a polar data federation activity that's been ongoing for about 3 years. And while there's tremendous international representation and there are a number of people from the US involved, there aren't that many agency representatives involved in that effort. And I think that kind of the polar effort for data federation would be like a flagship type of activity for IARPC to invest in.
And we're taking, thanks so much. We're taking notes of these specific entities. It helps to have that information so we can have some targeted outreach to include those groups in the conversation. I'll just foot stomp that, you know, there are many groups doing similar work that aren't talking to each other. So I think that's one thing we can do, IARPC collaborations, and bring in groups that are working on similar things across boundaries. Another example is spatial data infrastructure. Big effort in the Arctic, tends to be more operationally focused. And the authoritative hydrographic offices are contributors, and they're not always talking with the other groups, including on the science side. Although they say they want, everyone's talking about we need to work across these boundaries for multiple uses out of these data sets, broader societal benefits. But we need something like IARPC collaborations to actually bring those groups together to just discover what each other are doing and maybe make plans to network and collaborate.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to jump in on that and say we are noting ideas that come up in this call. And I had dropped a link in the chat earlier, and I will resend it now, of the survey where we're collecting input that then the drafting team can read directly. And so just to say, it would never hurt to resubmit your ideas there and make sure that we get it sort of in your words with all of the details. So just encouraging you to consider doing that as well.
This is an incredibly important point. Before we go to Allison, I'd like to maybe bounce this off of Alan or others on the call that want to speak to this. So I see this meeting as a way, like, we can't act on any of the input here. It's really, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, has to go through the formal link that Hazel shared. So the things we talk about here, we would put someone from this group would put that into this link for it to be officially considered. Is that correct there? So we can add value to the conversation here. It's just got to go through the formal feedback process to be considered in the implementation plan. Is that correct, Hazel, Ellen, others?
Yeah, go ahead,
I'll
Sarah.
come off mute here and take this, Hazel. So sorry, everybody. I'm Sarah Bowden. I'm the Executive Secretary for IRBEC. All comments that come in through the form online will be considered by the teams that you tag that you want to have them look at those comments. Listening session comments are being captured. They will be used as background for the team leads to as they go into drafting of the biennial implementation plan, can be, but hopefully they will be supplemented by, they will be a supplement to what you have submitted online. So strongly encouraged to submit it online, but we are capturing comments that will be used as background for the team leads as they go into drafting. Is that clear?
Thanks so much, Sarah. Any questions about that? Value added from this meeting? Thanks so much, Sarah. And if there are questions as we go, please feel free to unmute, speak up, or enter your comments into the chat. Allison, see you have your hand raised if you want to.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yes, I just wanted to mention on behalf of the Arctic Research Mapping Application and the Arctic Observing Viewer, we've been conducting a series of user studies, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from groups interested in having information about what the US is funding across the circumpolar region, and not just NSF. From Indigenous communities who want to know, what activities are happening in their backyard, and they don't care if that, borehole was funded by NSF or USGS, that type of thing. And for those of you that don't know, the applications we've been involved in, particularly with RMAP, we've been geotagging information and topic tagging the NSF research projects and those that NSF supports in Greenland and such from NOAA and NASA. And over the years, there's been various pushes to try to pull in information from other agencies that were successful for a while through the Alaska Data Integration Working Group, where we had a series of live web services exchanging information that in essence built on the information that you could get through like grants.gov, but geotagged to the location that the projects were happening and topic tagged them. And I'm wondering if there's any interest in advancing that effort of at least making the project level information available across agencies and simply adopting some vocabularies to topic tag and standard approaches for geotagging those.
And can I pile on there a little bit?
Please do.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion, Allison. And like all things, I think we should try to encourage people to do that in open systems. And so there's effort towards using web-based approaches to exposing data, like using scheme.org to expose information about awards and data sets and projects and organizations and funding and everything else. And so I think that having agencies have public presence through web-based data standards that can be harvested by groups like RMAP to produce a centralized resource would be a great move forward that doesn't require as much coordination as, say, building a large centralized data system. It allows sort of like a multiplicity of approaches while still working within an interoperable sort of web framework.
So I want to actually probe on that if we can, expand a bit. In data management terms, Allison, Matt, others, in your mind, what does that look like? What are the kinds of topics that would come up with making such systems open? What are some design considerations for those that are less familiar with designing such data systems?
Well, I've also been collaborating with SAON's Polar Observing Assets Working Group, which is also touching on this topic of creating registries of observing systems and registries of projects. And so from a design point, we're looking at putting forth a series of core metadata elements, which we believe will likely be in line with what schema.org is doing, and recommendations for standardized vocabularies for tagging that information. And I think that would, if each entity took on putting together each agency took charge of actually exposing their own information, then other entities could go out and aggregate that, whether it's RMAP or another effort. And Bill Manley might be able to speak more to that, as he's been co-chairing that working group as well.
Well, briefly, that working group under SAON, Committee on Observations and Networks, it's kind of a bridge between the polar data community and the polar observing community, and it focuses not on metadata interoperability for scientific data sets, but instead metadata interoperability for observing assets, such as observing sites or major research stations or ship tracks and buoy tracks, that sort of thing. And so it's related and is perhaps a piece, as Allison is pointing out, toward an open data system and fair principles.
So I just want to make a connection with the group. One thing that IARPC teams are trying to do is identify linkages with other priority areas and foundational area teams. And just based on this conversation, I just want to suggest that this activity could be coordinated also with the monitoring, observing, modeling, and prediction team. So identifying, one of the things they're doing is working on information, modeling, observation needs. And clearly we can talk about, okay, once you have the observation, what are some data management design decisions that we can take before we roll things out and implement to support fair and care. So on that topic, sorry.
Oh, just absolutely. Yeah, actually, there's a lot that could be done in terms of common goals between those two foundational activities.
So let's be sure to capture this conversation, clearly a topic relevant for this group to consider making it objective. We don't actually have that authority here, but something clearly to consider going forward. I do want to open it up to the rest of the floor for ideas, and it can be general fair care thoughts about that, questions about that. That's really, I want to foot stomp. That's our core activity. We're going to gravitate towards that. That's going to kind of cross-cut into all the work we do. There's also this other element that we're looking at that we really want to be community driven, is these special topics that will kind of work with the broader community to address while there's interest, and hopefully, you know, identify new ones as we go. So also be thinking about specific topics. The list we have here for special topics, these are just examples. These aren't the real objectives. These are just something that we came up with for conversation. So if you have ideas on specific topics that you think data management, thinking about fear and care and other best practices should be kind of thought about and addressed in the next 2 years, 5 years plus, please bring that up here and we can discuss it.
Mike, can I add a note to that? I thought that was a great explanation. And I, just as somebody who's looking at this from a very big picture perspective, particularly interested if there are data management issues that you think are particularly relevant to one of the priority areas. So something specific, a deep dive down into risk management and hazard mitigation or Arctic system interactions, that to me, that could be a really interesting discussion as well.
So others on this call might maybe probably more familiar than me, but there's obviously this interest in multiple uses out of single data sets, observing systems. And one thing we've been talking about with the other teams is, you know, maybe there's something around identifying where programs, science projects, the data collection for that can be kind of reworked a bit to ensure that we're also thinking about some of the immediate data information needs of those, say, dealing with hazards. So that kind of multiple use perspective of these things to get actionable, you know, decision makers potentially aware that some science activity is happening, so there can be some plans to share data. Does that resonate with this group at all? Could be risk management, sustainable, you know, any of these priority areas. that's something that you're seeing in your conversations in your various communities.
Mike, it looks like Igor has a hand raised.
Igor, floor is yours. And if you're speaking,
Okay, I unmuted myself. Okay, so the topics of today's discussion is data, Arctic data, and the data sets specifically. And it's high level plan now, but it needs to be specified. And there is a mechanism to submit our ideas. The public meeting are to solicit ideas. And there is an avenue to submit that ideas. But how they will be considered and what is our part as a representative of community just to submit our ideas for future discussion and wait 2 months until the final decision possibly will completely ignore our idea. Specifically, if we discuss data and data sets, will it be prioritized? What data set will get more attention? What new data sets needs to be considered? Or even 2 years implementation is too high level to pay attention to such specific, like what data set needs to be considered, especially if the data set has multiple users. So my question is, I would like to know, we submit our ideas that are solicited. Supposedly the team or teams will consider, but what can we do in the period between submission of our ideas and get feedback, or we don't need to get feedback. Feedback is only from us to the team, not back to community. That is my question, because I don't understand how it works. I have experience that then it was submitted to IRPEC. They said that it's too many specific ideas. They will be considered for implementation. Now we can resubmit the same ideas. And you know how many ideas were rejected or delayed to be considered before implementation. In half a year, we'll get implementation plan, and 2 more years possibly will pass again without any kind of response. So how at least we can get a list of data sets and possibly prioritized, or possibly mention which are in a good shape and which are can be considered as a gap in our knowledge and in our data distribution. What will happen, and how can we participate after submitting our ideas? There is a general but more or less specific question. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. And that's a key question. Before we request some more information about some of the criteria that's being used to identify some of the objectives we'll go forward with, and we all have the same questions. You know, it's a process involving multiple agencies. One clarification I do want to make is this team of clearly data is, specific data is going to emerge, come up, but the focus here is data management. So how do you manage data? What are some best practices with designing those systems for not only dissemination, but also being respectful of wishes to keep data from being disseminated maybe in its full form. So it's really about data management and learning about some of the ways agencies and others are advancing methods to do a better job doing that. So that's one point of clarification. And do we have anyone that wants to provide additional context for how this input will be translated into some of the objectives that actually are acted on with IARPC?
So I'll jump in here again, Mike, and I thought that was a great response to Igor's question. And thank you, Igor, for your question. I hear and understand your concern. It is accurate that in the course of preparing the Arctic Research Plan, which came out in December, we did receive a lot of comments that were very specific of specific types of research that should be undertaken. The decision was quite clear at that time that that was a high-level strategic plan, and that the details would be forthcoming in biennial implementation plans, this one which will come out in September. As in great frustration for many, many people, is that these plans are developed by federal agencies. Their discussions are pre-decisional about how they are going to utilize and fund research down the line. So they are by their very nature closed to the public. And there is really nothing that anyone can do other than submit their proposal and wait to see. I can guarantee you that it will be considered. The drafting teams will take into account all the many comments that they receive, but the drafting is a federal process. And at the end of that process, the biennial implementation plan will come out. I also want to note that IARPC shifted to this biennial implementation planning process so that it would be able to be more flexible and responsive to community needs, research community needs, and also the needs of people who live and work in the Arctic. And so, you know, not seeing exactly what you were hoping to see in this biennial implementation plan doesn't mean it won't be in the next one, or seeing it in this one does not guarantee it will be in the next biennial implementation plan. So we think that this biennial implementation plan structure will have the ability to be more flexible and responsive to needs. And we'll have to see how that plays out over the long run, but that is our hope, and that was the direction from our principals.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think that perfectly reinforces, and this is open for discussion here, our proposed deliverable, which is to develop a set of considerations. So one thing Igor and others I'd say is open invitations to join these conversations for the next 2+ years and help shape those considerations. I think the more compelling arguments we make as we work together, the more convincing those considerations will be to help with those kind of more closed top-down decisions. And by the way, you know, I work for a federal agency. I'm really in the same situation as you. I don't make the final decisions. I facilitate these discussions for others to consider according to, you know, requirements and other things that drive these processes. And Igor, did you have a response? Your hand is still up.
Well, I'm not sure. I know how to mute myself, but I'm not sure how to remove that.
Okay, no problem. If you need to talk, you can just voice up, no problem. And
okay, I'm
thank
still
you.
on mute, and my concern is that there are some issues that can get considered as a gap in federal studies, at least not sufficiently good results. And there are issues that are not considered by IARPC at all. So that's why it's very strange. It is significant, possible, it could be significant issue that never was considered by IARPC. There is no working group, self-formed or formed officially in attention. If IARPC does not pay much attention to that gap and is not included into consideration, and federal agency has now they are free to take into consideration all we can suggest, by they also completely free to avoid consideration of such things. We will, in half a year, we will receive their plan, but not response. Why they take into account one or another issues. And if we are speaking about databases.
Absolutely. So Igor, thank you so much. And
it's databases. There is a possibility to prioritize some of
We need this
And this
energy.
is task of your group.
We need this. Thank you so
Sorry.
much. We need this energy. Please join us, the data management team, in the future in discussions. We want to help funnel these ideas into our deliverables. Please join us in continuing this conversation. Thank you
Data
so much.
management group in RPEC or where?
The data management is one team, and some of the topics you're bringing up are certainly, I believe, relevant for what we'll end up doing next 2 years plus. So data management foundational team is one place, and then of course the other different groups, priority areas, 4 priority areas, and other foundational groups. But what I'm hearing from you, I would love to continue the conversation to help us shape these considerations going forward and adapt through the plan. I do want to turn to, so we have Jonathan, did you have a comment? And then we'll go to Matt Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The thing I'd like to point out is if you see a connection where a data set, very detailed development activity for data would help with one of the priority areas. So you know that there's this opportunity here. We're really missing it because whoever wrote the plan is not aware of it or hasn't considered your input. I think the way to be effective in this new plan is to target priority areas. And what we can do as a data team, data management team, we can try to make space for this fair and care objective. That's what we're trying to do here, under which we can do a lot of other things that don't fit under the priority areas. But we're going to have very limited bandwidth in that. And those themselves are very broad topics. So I encourage you, Igor, and others, if you know of a data set or any other data management activity that would support any of these priority areas, for you to make that connection, either tell us about it, submit it through that form, and bring it up by going to those priority area team meetings. They're holding similar listening sessions, because that's really the way to be effective under this new structure.
Thanks. It's an ongoing process. Thank you, Jonathan. And
Thank
so, Matt, and if others have response to what Matt or Jonathan mentioned, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Matt, did you have something?
Yeah, it's kind of a different topic. A lot of the discussion so far has been around data management systems that focus on observational data that's oftentimes in environmental or physical systems. At the Arctic Data Center, where we operate, in addition to those kinds of data, we're also interacting with the research community that's collecting data from the social sciences, archaeology, anthropology, a wide variety of disciplines like that. And we've realized over the years that we have a lot less infrastructure for really understanding the subtleties of, for example, sensitive data classification and other issues that are, I think, pertinent to effectively addressing the care principles in data management. When I did some research on, how do we classify data sets in order to publicly disclose the sensitive data status of that, I found that there were relatively, limited numbers of things like controlled vocabularies for data classification within these spaces. And so we have started working with a small working group to try to improve data management practices with respect to care and to better support social science disciplines and other disciplines that oftentimes have to address data sovereignty issues and other issues with interactions with local communities. And I think it would be a great area for IARPC to come up with shared visions of how to, for example, communicate about data sensitivity levels across agencies, and to be able to document and publish data that have been anonymized but have an underlying data set that might be more sensitive and can't be made publicly available. So I think that this area is another area where interagency collaboration could be really helpful. We've been getting a start in this with our small social science working group, which a couple of people on this call have been participating in. But we've been also thinking about how to do this within the context of the larger community. I think IARPC would be a great venue for that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I personally would love to hear from, federal agencies, how they are or not thinking about these topics. That, one way to look at it is, and I can speak with personal experience here, if you don't address these important issues with respecting the data owners, then you're going to run into access issues. So if you're a National Science Foundation funded social scientist, you collect data and it maybe wasn't collected in the right way. That's not what I can speak, to personal experience with. But if it just you weren't set up to have a plan, get approvals to share all of or some of that data through the public portals, then you're kind of stuck. You're unable to get that data out. So to just make those design decisions before you do the research, you can intervene at the right time to make it possible to get those data disseminated. And that's something that I'd love to bring up in this data management group. And I also want to flag other groups, all of them obviously are relevant, but in particular, the other foundation team, participatory research and indigenous leadership and research. Matt, I don't know how you plan, in addition to this meeting, if or how you plan to submit that idea, but if you want to flag data management and participatory research and indigenous leadership foundational groups specifically, and others that you have in mind that would help us put the group that's deciding, put the pieces together. But that obviously very relevant topic here, especially as the new IARPIC plan really has a special emphasis on Native people's engagement. I think that would be received well. Thank you. And so others, comments. One thing I want to propose is, I don't know if we've heard from everyone, but we can go down the list. And it's okay to say nothing to add, but it'd be great to, if you haven't spoken yet, tell us who you are and any reactions to any of this, ideas. Now's the time, unless there are serious objections to that way forward. We have about 15 minutes left. So we have, I'm just going to go down the line here, Eamon. And again, it's okay, no comments, I understand. We'll just move on, but it'd be great to hear from you. Any ideas that are coming up as you're hearing this?
So I'm quite new to the group, so probably I need more time to understand the context. But one suggestion, and again, be patient with me. I might, as I said, not look to all the different aspects of this working group. We should also consider a new set of user requirements coming out from the AI community. AI is a very specific community because, first of all, they have their own requirements for managing data and connecting it or feeding it to their systems. And also the AI system by itself has ability to alter the structure of the data. So you can basically recreate a new set of data with biases or without biases. So I'm just putting this idea out here as a potential.
Absolutely, and terrific point, Eamon. I do want to briefly punt this to Alan, who I don't know if this was mentioned in the open remarks. He and Elizabeth Hoy from NASA developed the data management plan that we're working under. And one thing we're talking about is, we're really trying to capture these, local community engagement aspects, CARE principles, but we can't, it's going to look alien to those that are working on big data, artificial intelligence, high-tech stuff. Let's make sure we don't miss that. And Alan, do you want to, how is that, don't mean to put you on the spot, how is that reconciled in the plan in the end?
Yeah, no, I don't have a ton to add, except to say that when we were trying to work on the data management part of the Arctic research plan, it kept getting bigger and bigger and broader, right? It's like, okay, well, if we're talking about data, then are we talking about code? Okay, are we talking about computing environments? Are we talking about, because they all go together. And I think that one of the reasons we're focusing around fair data management and CARE principles as well is that it's a huge umbrella to fit within, right? And so we could envision, for example, to your point directly, like what does fair for AI related applications mean, right? There's that interoperability aspect, and what do we have to focus on for interoperability for those applications? So I think that tying to those sorts of things could be a way to address both the long tail data as well as the big data together. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think it'd be terrific to hear, we talk about care and, well, to some degrees, fair in some circles, some contexts, not necessarily in the AI. So I'd love to, make that critique, Eamon. Let's not forget about those agencies that are working in AI. These principles may not seem relevant, and as a result, IARPC may lose some engagement from their federal partners. So terrific point. Thanks so much. And I encourage you to continue to insert that into the various ways to provide input into this process. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a thought on what Eamon said. I haven't heard much from this other foundational area called technology, application, and innovation, but that might be a partnership we could strike with them to address the AI question. Because to me, it seems like it's a little bit outside of the data management area. It's interdisciplinary.
Yeah, but thanks. I would encourage you, Eamon, make a connection, data management, technology application innovation, and say, hey, this is CARE principle that's really coming out of this participatory research community. Maybe we're being too focused on this, and these CARE principles can add value to some of these AI conversations where we're not really emphasizing principles like that. Maybe FAIR more than CARE. What can we learn? Thank you. And so we have Amber Budden. Have any reactions?
Amber posted in the chat that it's she has a lot of background noise, and so
Okay.
has to pass at this time. But it means you can feel free to add stuff to the chat too.
Absolutely. Please do. We're monitoring that as well. And we have Ann Garland, very active in the local community research. Very interested in your reaction to some of this.
So Anne also just posted in the chat that she's traveling, but well, there's a longer comment in the chat to read. So glad to assist Matt with application of CARE and FAIR for local communities, especially related to the priority of risk management and hazard mitigation. I've also been working with Peter Pulsifer for ecosystem map of resources to serve EML.
Okay, Alan Garland, glad you're still engaged and hope you're contributing input through the link and other ways to help shape what we do. And Christine Matea, any reactions to this?
Hello. So I would just note that I can coordinate with my colleagues. I'm not a NASA scientist. I just help with coordination purposes, but I know Liz Hoy is going to possibly get more involved in this group. And we do have, all the DACs, the data archives within NASA for hosting data and all that's free and open. So, but I will touch base with Liz Hoy and others who probably have more substantive contributions to make.
Thanks so much, Christine. And looking at the clock, about 8 minutes left. Katrina, Kim, anything to?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hello everyone from Norway. I'm more here, we're new to this community and mostly for learning best practices and see how in future we can cooperate also beyond the governmental borders, since Arctic it's united. And I also wondering, since I was just thinking, I don't know, while you was talking, since it's also data management and activity, do you have some group or task force looking on the kind of risk management for the I mean, it's kind of for data management and how to address and what kind of risks do you foresee or priority risks? So, and I don't know, any plans to have some mitigation measures so that you succeed in your reaching your objectives?
Absolutely. And just my interpretation of that, and Matt Jones, I'm curious about your thoughts, the social science data topic. When we're talking about access, releasing these data, what are some serious risks that we need to really handle and get out to the community to make sure we're not, presenting undue risk in the process? And that's just a narrow interpretation of your broader comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and one that we're actively considering within our data center right now. We're looking at what kind of additional metadata do we need to collect in order to be able to properly evaluate that kind of risk. And I think if we had, community-wide standards and approaches and rubrics for that kind of evaluation, it would be helpful to, basically improve consistency across data management systems across the Arctic. So it would be great.
Thanks so much. And Katrina, I encourage you to make that terrific point, the link that Hazel provided, and any opportunity to get, but please feel free to join these data management conversations going forward. Rahesh, Kundal, anything, reactions?
Hello, everyone. I am also new to this group, and I'm working on navigating the new Arctic project as a graduate student at Vanderbilt. So at this point, I'm just taking in information, looking for potential new sources of data. To Eamon's point, I'm also interested in use of machine learning, AI-related big data management and stuff related to that. So at this point, just getting myself to familiarize with what data management practices are, are like with IARPC. So yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so much, and very smart getting involved with IARPC while a graduate student. That's very prudent. Thanks for joining. And thank you. Sophia, if you have anything to add, if not.
Hey, Mike, sorry, nothing to add here. Just taking notes for Lieutenant J.G. Padilla.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining, and hopefully we engage in the future. And so I think we heard from everyone, and just with the last 4 minutes, quick round the room, and then I want to kick it back to the chair, Alan and Hazel to wrap up the meeting. Any closing thoughts, any other ideas, critical questions? We want to make sure your voice, we give you the right information to articulate this, to get it into the implementation plan process. Now's the time to ask. Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I'm turning it back to Hazel and/or Alan to provide closing comments and close the meeting. Thanks.
Before we do that, I still let Bill, you raised your hand.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, coming in a little late. Are there any particular challenges towards the engagement of agency data scientists that we could pursue? It seems like engagement and involvement, collaboration could be more fruitful.
Thank you.
Bill, that's something I think we need to work on.
I don't know if it would help to have like dedicated promote job duties as part of FTEs. I don't know exactly. You all would know better.
I think there's space within the implementation of fair and care and open data for agencies to talk about what they're doing and within their own data systems. So we could plan to host a meeting on that topic and invite USGS, NOAA, NCEI, other places where data is being, repositories and archives for Arctic data from the federal government.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. And please help us shape these into objectives. We need to learn from you and embrace your great ideas. So thanks again, and over to Hazel and Alan.
Well, I'll just echo your thanks and say that a reminder that this meeting will be recorded and posted on the website. And please do send your ideas fully articulated into the form that I dropped the link in the chat a couple of times. You can find it on the website. And keep an eye out for future data team meetings. We should be meeting within the next month or two on a topic to be determined. And it was a really great discussion today, and we'd love to have you all back and continue participating.
Great. I don't have anything else more to add. Thank you so much, Hazel, and thank you to everyone for participating and contributing.
Thank you all. Thanks, Hazel, once again.
See you next time.